experimentation in the field of cold fusion, or low-energy nuclear reactions, as we're going to call it here, otherwise known as LENR, has been challenging to reproduce. David Niebauer believes that cold fusion is inevitable. He tells us that a race has begun to develop the working prototypes, which some insiders are saying could be to market as early as 2 or 3 years from now. The 3 companies in the race are Leonardo Corporation, dealing with Andrea Rossi's ECAT device, Brillouin Energy Group, and also Defcalion Green Technologies, originally out of Greece. David is going to update us on the most recent news and developments of all 3 companies and their strategies to get that technology to market, which naturally addresses the critical barriers of both R&D investment funds and the sometimes inhibiting practices, as you just saw in Ruby's presentation, of the U.S. Patent and Trademark offices. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Regina. Okay. Let's get my first slide up and we can get started. Is Mitch back there? Okay, there we go. Good. So what if I were to tell you that there's a new technology that's been validated by reputable third parties, that's cheap, relatively inexhaustible, and can satisfy all of our energy needs without nuclear or carbon waste?
Where is it?
And what if I were to tell you that with this technology, we'll be able to desalinate water, irrigate our deserts, and end hunger on the planet, and also stop the obscene water wars that have started to take place, and provide clean, potable water to people around the planet who really just don't have it right now? And what if I were to tell you that with this technology, we can end the strife in the Middle East? That the war over scarce resources can be a nightmare from which we finally awake? Well, I'm here to tell you today that this technology is real and we are on the cusp of commercializing it. What do we call it? What are we talking about? Cold fusion, which is a really unfortunate name for some reasons that I'll talk about a little bit later on. LENR, low energy nuclear reaction. I'm sorry, this is a name that only an engineer could love, and my apologies to the engineers. LENR I really don't like at all. The new fire, you heard Martin Fleischmann, Memorial Project people calling it the new fire, and Andrea Rossi also calls it the new fire. And I kind of like that. So I'm going to talk today, when I'm talking about this, I'll talk about low energy nuclear action, or LENR, or I'll talk about the new fire. So my name is David Niebauer. I'm an attorney by profession, a lawyer. I focus all of my energies in alternative energy projects, and I work primarily with promoting intellectual property strategy and protection. And I work with commercializing clean energy companies. I work with some of the top companies right now that are commercializing clean energy technologies. So I'm really, really passionate about this field. But I take a dispassionate approach, okay? I make money on companies that are commercializing products. That not just good ideas, not things that we hope we can have, but actual real products. And I'm here to tell you that LENR, the new fire, is the most interesting, most exciting technology that I've seen in my career. Now I have to confess to you here that one of my energy clients said to me, don't go and talk at this conference. Okay, this is a fringe conference. It's going to be bad for your reputation, your credibility. Don't do it. Okay, but I'm here, and I don't think you're on the fringe. I don't think this is the fringe. I think this is the new frontier.
That's it. That's it.
The new frontier. And I know that we create reality with language, with our language. And nothing is possible until we're able to imagine it, until we talk about it, until we make it real in our language and how we speak and how we do things. So I believe in the work that we're doing here, and I know that we're on the frontier, we're moving forward, and there are going to be people joining us very quickly, and they'll say, those are the ones who took a stand, who had the courage to go out and say, yes, this can really happen. This is real. So in our short time here together, I want to talk about three things. Why I think LENR, the cold fire, is the most exciting technology out there. And I know that we're going to hear about other things during the conference. I'm really looking forward to people informing me about other things that are viable, that could compete with this new technology. I want to talk about why I believe conventional alternative energy sources are just not going to be able to do it. That we can't solve our problems with conventional alternative energy, in my opinion. And I'm going to talk about why LENR is our best hope. Why not just technologically, but also from a commercial point of view. So let's get started. I first heard about cold fusion in 1989 when Pons and Fleischmann did their experiment, and I was very excited about it. I was a young lawyer. I remember sitting in my office in New York going, damn, this is really, really interesting. But it got debunked. Soon after, MIT, Caltech, they said, this is not real, this was in your imagination, you're deluded, and I pretty much just ignored it and went about my business, started working with other alternative energy companies. I've worked with all different types of companies. I've worked with solar development, I've worked in fuel cells, I've worked with battery technology. I'm doing a lot of work right now in the power grid, trying to upgrade the power grid so that we can get more solar and more wind onto the system. So, as I said, I'm passionate about this. I keep working at it. And I kind of focus my attention on that, what I considered real. These are real technologies, real things that we can actually bring into the market and make real. So that's, I'm kind of going about my business doing that and really enjoying it, working with great people who are inspired, who are really truly trying to change the world and how we use energy. And then one day I was going out for a run, as I often do. I live in San Francisco, so I was running in Golden Gate Park. I have my headset on and listening to a podcast. It was a podcast by the renewable energy world. And in the podcast, they were interviewing Dennis Bushnell, who Ruby talked about. Dennis Bushnell is the chief research scientist at NASA's Langley Research Center. So he's no slouch. This is a man with a high reputation. He knows what he's talking about. And he talked about it, and he said something really interesting just happened. An Italian inventor has demonstrated a cold fusion device, and he's getting a significant amount of heat out of this device in kind of at levels that we haven't seen before. And he talked about the history, and he said, yeah, it was debunked early on, but actually scientists have been working on it underground since that time. And there actually have been hundreds of experiments that show anomalous heat. Anomalous heat, meaning heat coming out of an experiment and out of a reaction that can't be explained with conventional science. So he said something is happening. We've known that something's been happening, but we don't have a theory to explain why it's happening. The amounts of energy that we're getting are really minuscule. We're talking, milliwatts. It's hardly enough to be useful, and the reactions are notoriously difficult to replicate. And so he said, until now, it's really not been that interesting. But something happened, and he got excited about it, and he got me excited about it. And this is what he said, and I want to read this because this is what I'm kind of just running along, kind of minding my business. That's kind of neat. And he says, I think we're almost over the we don't understand it problem. I think we're almost over the this does not produce anything useful problem. I think this will go forward fairly rapidly now. If it does, this is capable of, by itself, completely changing geoeconomics, geopolitics, and solving climate issues. Whoa, that's what I said. Wow. And I stopped and I listened to it like 3 times in a row. I say, what did he just say? Did he just say what I think he just said? Dennis Bushnell, the chief scientist at NASA Langley. And that kind of really started things going for me. I went home, probably my wife Kate, I'm sure she's in the audience here, she probably remembers I went home, I was all kind of really excited. I went onto the internet, I Googled, I'm like, damn, this actually has continued. There has actually been continuing research in this. This is really, really interesting. I looked up Andrea Rossi, who is this Rossi guy? Excuse me, I lose my voice a little bit here. Who's this Rossi guy? And I actually went on his site and I sent him an email. And I said, Dr. Rossi, congratulations. It's very exciting work that you're doing. I'm amazed. I said, so great that you're demonstrating your device. I want to get one of your devices out in California. Come out and put up a device. Let's go and put it up at the Google campus. Let's go and put a demonstration up at Apple server farm. Let's get Elon Musk to put it up and run one of his electric cars, or even the SpaceX work that he's doing. And that must have hit a chord with Rossi. Rossi emailed me back fairly quickly, almost immediately, and he said, yes, I'd like to come out to see you. He got on a plane, he flew out to San Francisco. Kate and I took him out to dinner. He's a very gracious man, serious, intentional, very credible. I mean, he has a mission. He has a mission. He's working on a mission. I met with him the next morning. We talked about his technology. We talked about the possibilities of what's possible. We talked about where he was in terms of his financing and what he was doing. He then introduced me to his U.S. exclusive licensee, a group called AMP Energo that are based in New Hampshire. Some of the stakeholders of AMP Energo are former officials of the Department of Energy. They've been working with Rossi for quite a long time. Rossi has something, okay? I don't have necessarily a lot of inside information. I have some inside information. I do know that what he's doing is real and he's moving forward. And I'll talk a little bit about it after that. So I got really excited. You can kind of tell I'm sort of an excitable kind of guy. I get passionate about things. And I started looking at it. I started blogging. I started trying to gather information. I told my friends all about it. And then a good friend of mine, Ed Beardsworth, who is a physicist who used to work with EPRI, which is a utility-sponsored research lab who follows new energy technology. He said, David, you're blogging about this guy Rossi, who you just met and you barely even know. Don't you know that there's a guy in your backyard right across the bay in Berkeley, California, whose name is Robert Godis, who has gotten significant energy out of his device? Why don't you go meet with Robert? So he introduced me to Robert Godis. I became really good friends with Robert. Robert has a theory on what he thinks is going on in the reaction, and he uses this theory to guide his experiments. Now, we talked about this a little bit, and I think I'll touch on it a little bit later, but I'll just say again, the balance between the theorists and the experimentalists is really, really crucial. And without a theory, you're really kind of shooting in the dark. It's trial and error, you're trying things, will this work, that work, but without knowing the groundwork of why it's happening, you really have a hard time, even in your experiments, to know what you should be looking for. I mean, I kind of think of all the hoopla over the great search for the Higgs boson, okay? The Higgs boson is this theoretical particle that came directly out of a pure theory, mathematical theory. If the experimentalists who were doing the work at the Large Hadron Accelerator didn't have a theory to look for the Higgs boson, they wouldn't have found it in a million years. Impossible. Wouldn't have found it. So we're all hoping and moving forward toward some kind of theory, and I'll talk a little bit later about Robert Godes's theory, at least kind of a basic understanding of what it is. But the fact that he has a theory and he's using it as a guide to his experiments, I think is really, really important. I actually began representing Brillouin Energy Corporation, so full disclosure, I'm their General Counsel. I've helped them raise over $3 million from far-sighted angel investors who have come to the lab, looked at what they're doing, talked to Robert about his theory, looked at his devices, looked at his research, and said, you know what, we're gonna fund you and help you get going. With this money, we were able to enter into a research and development agreement with the SRI International, Stanford Research Institute, and they are now working. They have 15 engineers working with SRI, working to improve the reaction. They have 2 separate devices that they're working on. One is called the wet boiler, which operates at relatively lower temperatures, and they're also working on something called the hot tube, which is designed to get to temperatures of 600 degrees Celsius, which is hot enough to boil water, run a turbine, create steam, run a turbine, create electricity. So very, very exciting things that are going on with Brillouin. And I want to just say a little bit more about SRI International, who they're working with. Excuse me. As I said, they're one of the premier research and development groups in the world. They've developed some of the technologies that we use day to day. The computer mouse was developed at SRI International. They also developed the Siri artificial intelligent voice that's in the new iPhones. So they are really at the cutting edge of research and development. They also have on their staff, and have since early on, Michael McCoubrey, who is one of the premier cold fusion scientists. He was a postdoc with Martin Fleischmann. He probably, he's one of a handful of scientists that know cold fusion, that understand the reaction, that knows how to work the reaction. So he is now working in collaboration with Robert Godes to develop a prototype, a commercial prototype of a working device. They don't have one yet, but if you're going to stack the cards and you're going to create something real, it's not a bad team to be working with. So let's see what else that I wanted to say about that. An interesting approach, say go-to-market strategy that Brillouin has, is to retrofit stranded generation assets. For example, coal plants that have been shut down by the EPA. And the idea is to go in with the hot tube and replace the boiler, the coal-burning boiler that's in there, and generate electricity with the hot tube. The plant's already set up with the grid, so the energy would go directly into the grid, almost without anyone noticing it. There's already a power purchase agreement in place with the utility. It could happen that way without a whole lot of fanfare, and all of a sudden, our energy is being generated with this new energy technology, which would be very, very exciting. Let's see what my other slide here is. Oh yeah, this is good. So I want to talk a little bit about the basis of what's going on in this low energy nuclear reaction. Now, this is going to be very simplistic, and Ruby, please jump in when I make a mistake. As I said, I'm a lawyer, I'm not a physicist. I'm going to try to explain it in ways that I can understand it, so that at least we have a kind of a general sense of what we think is going on. And like I said before, we don't have a theory, so it makes it really difficult to explain what's happening. But the first thing I'd say is that what LENR, it's not hot fusion. There's not the whatever, either deuterium going on, hot fusion, which is up here, or other kind of things that they're doing at some of the ETAR experimental lab that they're doing in Switzerland right now and spending billions and billions of dollars doing it. But what this slide shows is that here are the chemical reactions, burning things, okay? And here on this side is the energy density. Now this slide was given to me by my friend Matt Trebethick, who is a venture capitalist at the Venrock venture capital firm. And he told me that I could use it as long as I let people know that it comes from him. He did this work. But I got really, really inspired by this because, as Matt says, we have down here the chemical reactions, burning gas, gasoline, burning things. And then we have orders of magnitude higher, we get to the nuclear reactions. And as Matt said, either nature is incredibly perverse and doesn't allow any kind of energy generation in this range, or we simply haven't figured it out yet. We either need better chemistry or better physics to understand how to access the energy levels in these ranges. And I think, when scientists discovered the nuclear reaction, 100 years ago or whatever, not even that long ago, they got really, really excited because here we can show a huge amount of energy release by splitting an atom or by fusion. We can create a bomb that everyone can see. It's extraordinary. This is this extraordinary energy coming out. An LENR device, and Ruby showed it, it's in this little, it's in a little test tube. The energy coming out is very subtle in a way. It's smaller. It's it has to be coaxed out a little bit. So, and in fact, most researchers believe that rather than the strong nuclear force, there are these fundamental forces of nature. Two of the most important, one is the strong nuclear force and one is the weak nuclear force. A lot of attention has gone into the strong force. The strong force is what happens up here when the energy is being released. The weak nuclear force is a little bit more enigmatic. It's more how elements are transmuting in ways that we don't completely understand. And the energy released is less. So scientists haven't really paid as much attention to what's going on in the low energy reaction. So what's happening here? LENR might not be nuclear. That's why I'm not sure it's right to call it a low energy nuclear reaction. It might be a high chemical reaction that we just don't quite understand. Or maybe it's somewhere, something in between. Nature doesn't care if you call it nuclear or chemical, all right? There's something going on. What's going on there, we're not entirely clear. Okay, so the simple way that I'm going to explain, and I'll just put this slide up here as a graphic. Here's what we think is happening, and I'm using this is a kind of a general theory. This is based on Robert Godes's theory, which he calls quantum fusion. It's also has similarities to the theory that's being promoted by two scientists named Whittam and Larson, the Whittam-Larson theory. And this is a theory that NASA is following and that they believe is the reaction. A lot of people don't think that this is really what's happening, but at least it gives us kind of a general idea. So the basis is take hydrogen, very energy dense. By the way, the simplest element in the known universe, a single proton and a single electron, very, very simple. And we're using, in this case, simple hydrogen, protium, the basic isotope. They're also deuterium, which is a proton and a neutron, and then there's tritium, a proton and 3 neutrons. So these isotopes of hydrogen is where we believe the energy is being coaxed out of. In the beginning, palladium was the metal that was being used. Rossi has now kind of broken onto the world that we can actually use nickel, which is a lot more abundant on the Earth and a lot cheaper, therefore. And also, rather than using deuterium, we can use simple hydrogen to stimulate the reaction. So at the atomic level, the metal, the nickel in this case, forms a lattice structure. And in the lattice structure, the hydrogen is loaded into it, into the kind of the interstices of the lattice. And the loading is an important aspect of it. So how do you do that? Electrochemists know how to load hydrogen into the metal. Then the lattice is pushed out of equilibrium by using an electromagnetic shock wave or something similar. Different things have been used, but the lattice gets pushed out of equilibrium. When it gets pushed out of equilibrium, that single proton captures an electron, either its own electron, or it captures an electron that's being put into the system by the electromagnetic pulse, and it creates a neutron, an ultra-cold neutron. Neutrons don't occur in nature. They have to be generated sort of in a nuclear reaction. The neutron then combines with other hydrogen atoms to create these isotopes of hydrogen, from deuterium to tritium. Robert Godes believes also quadrium, which is a very unusual and unstable isotope of hydrogen. And once it hits that level, at each level, energy is being released. Energy has to be put into the system to deform the lattice, to create it, take it out of equilibrium. And as it goes back into equilibrium using forces and mediated by the weak nuclear force, energy is released. Little bits of energy along the way are released all the way down until ultimately transmutation occurs and we end up with helium. That's the basic idea. Something like that is happening. Things are getting jostled, and it's the movement from matter to energy. We're starting to unlock the mystery of that movement from matter to energy, because at each stage, the only reason energy gets released is because the result of the interaction, there's less matter in the resulting end product, and what's the remaining part of it gets released as energy. Oh, I want to do this one. This is one of my favorite slides. This is Jessica Rabbit seducing the Coulomb barrier. I got this from Ed Storms. Professor Edmund Storms is one of the premier scientists, and he says that here's the issue. The issue is the scientists got really seduced by the strong nuclear force and by banging things together and creating huge amounts of energy. In order to do that, you have to break through what's called the Coulomb barrier. Does everyone know what the Coulomb barrier is? Or the Coulomb barrier is like this electrostatic force that doesn't actually allow nuclei to combine. And in order to do it, you've got to accelerate them at huge amounts of energy, and that's what we're trying to do in hot fusion. What Ed says is, no, let's try seducing the Coulomb barrier. Let's find ways to work around it, to release small amounts of energy that are usable for human beings, that don't create bombs, but create usable amounts of heat and energy. I think that's brilliant. Okay, why, let's see, I went back to this, I'm not sure why. I wanted to talk about why I think why conventional alternative energy is just not going to get the job done. And we look again down here at the energy density of solar is way down here. Now solar is improving in efficiency, and it's going to continue to improve, which is good. But we're at these really low levels, and there are problems with solar energy, obviously. One thing, it's intermittent, and this is the same with wind. It only happens when the wind's blowing or when the sun's shining. We don't have batteries that can hold the energy. The most dense are these lithium-ion batteries.
Is that for liters of sunlight?
This is, you know what? I don't know. I'll have to ask Matt to give you the answer of what that is exactly. I think it has to do with the photovoltaic cells that are being used. So as I said, these are going to improve in efficiency and energy density, but I don't think it's going to be enough. There's also about solar that you don't hear about very often. The photovoltaic cells are made with rare earth metals. The mining of them and the processing of the metals creates toxic wastes that we really don't know what to do with. So we really do need a breakthrough energy technology. And that's why I'm promoting it. That's why I'm looking for companies that are working in it, that are trying to move things into this area where we start getting higher energy density with less risks and less waste. Oh, that was my slide for why solar is difficult to get on the grid as well. And as I said, the grid is antiquated and in some ways can't take a lot of the energy. The nice thing about LENR, once it gets perfected, is it is a true distributed energy power source, which means rather than having that diesel generator that we have out there keeping our lights on, we would have a LENR device that's providing the electricity for us to use here, completely clean. None of the waste that's coming out of that. That's the hope. That's the promise of LENR. So, the three companies. Professor Rossi, looking very charismatic and charming in that photo. Brillouin Energy and Defcalion Green Energy Technologies. I've talked a little bit about Rossi. I'm told by his group that are working with him that he is no longer in direct control of his company, that there is a group now that is kind of taking over the replication of his work. They are working now to make sure that they can stabilize the reaction, that they can get a sufficient amount of energy out of it. Rossi has always said he wants to demonstrate 1 megawatt. He doesn't want to light 5 light bulbs. He wants a megawatt, which is a huge amount of energy. I think it's for sort of commercial reasons so that it puts out of people's mind that this is not real. If you can generate that much energy, then this is real. So his group is working on that now, independently of him, so that they can say, we took his secret sauce and we've been able to replicate his work. And my hope is to do a demonstration out at the Google facility or an Apple server farm or someplace where it really get people's attention and they say, this is real, finally, we understand. We thank you for all the work you've done. Let's go out and move this forward. Defcalion, I don't know quite as much about Defcalion. They apparently have worked with Rossi early on. They apparently reverse engineered some of his work, and they claim that they haven't stole it, although Rossi says that they stole his intellectual property. One of the things that I joke of as a lawyer is that we'll know when LENR is true when the first patent lawsuit gets filed. Watch my words, it will probably happen. So Defcalion claims that they're going to go on to the Toronto Stock Exchange and sell stock to the public to help support what they're doing. They're supposedly we're going to do it this month. I haven't seen any announcement yet that that's happening. So they're all vying. These are three that I think are the leading ones. There are actually other companies out there, some that are under the radar, a little more under the radar. In fact, another Italian, Piantelli, who was the first to work with the nickel hydrogen systems, also has a company in Italy. You don't hear very much about it. He's filed patents around that, and it could be that there'll be someone else coming out of the side that we don't really have our attention on. I really do believe that there is plenty of room for a lot of different companies to do this. I think we're going to find that there are different ways to coax the reaction, different ways to seduce the Coulomb barrier, that a lot of different methods will be applied. And when the US Patent Office does wake up, which I'm sure that they will, then there will be a number of companies that will be able to secure for themselves some little area of monopoly or area of protection where they can move through commercialization and move it to the next level. Going back to Brillouin, and since I touched on the issue of patents, and I promised in my introduction to this that I would talk a little bit about patents, I believe Brillouin has the strongest potential patent position. Their patents were written by Dr. David Sloan, who was a partner at Kilpatrick Townsend, one of the preeminent patent law firms in the country. They wrote the patent in exchange for equity in his company, which is almost unheard of. Patent law firms do not take equity because they see so many inventions, they're just like, no, if we took equity, we'd never make any money. The fact that they did that, I think, is very significant. Their patent has been granted in China, for what that's worth. Some people claim that the Chinese don't honor patents. That's changing to some extent. So their patent has been granted in China. So at least we have one country internationally that has recognized it. In the U.S., there's the application. It hasn't been denied. It's just sitting there. And as we said earlier, as Ruby pointed out earlier, the Patent Office has not been granting patents directly in cold fusion, but that is starting to change. Certainly when we have a demonstration device, that will change quite readily. The U.S. Navy was just granted a patent recently, basically using LENR for transmutation of nuclear waste and generating energy and heat out of that reaction, and their patent was granted, and there have been other patents granted. So I'm not one who says that the Patent Office is just completely closing the door. I think we have to keep working at it. I think we have to be more professional about how the patents get filed and how they get issued, how they get run through. And I think eventually we'll find that there's room for these players as well as other players. Interestingly, I was speaking with Mike McCrube just recently, and he did an interview. And in his interview, he says, I have been working on trying to get the scientific community to accept the reality of cold fusion and LENR for basically my entire career, for 30 years. And he said, I'm now at the point where I think that we have to change our strategy. And I'm focusing my energy now on commercialization. I'm working with the companies that are trying to bring out a commercial prototype where we can put it up and we can say, damn it, this is working, okay? We're gonna keep let's get the funding and the research and development that we need to move this on to the next level. And this slide is I'm just saying, I'm not the only one that believes in LENR. These are I kind of took people that have high credentials. Brian Josephson, Nobel Prize winner, Dennis Bushnell I talked about, Peter Hagelstein at MIT, doing great work swimming upstream there at MIT, Ed Storms, who's retired now from Los Alamos National Lab. These are highly credible scientists who support the reality of cold fusion, and they're working to move this to the next level. So, in closing, I think we have to take this technology seriously. I think all of you here probably do already. We need more funding for research and development. We're getting virtually zero funding out of the public coffers, and I think that really needs to change. And I know that a lot of you out there are change agents. And so my appeal to you is to contact your congressman. Let them know that this is real. Cover it in the media. Get people to see it. If you're in a position to invest, look for some of the companies to help support to move this forward to the next level. It's vitally, vitally important that we do that. The more research we put into it, the closer we get to the reality of a true commercial device that we can all use. So I want to take a minute. Do I have a minute, Regina, for some questions? And a couple questions? Yeah, and then we can wrap up. Any questions out there?
We need to have this hot for the questions. Okay, here we go. Let me pass this back to people, okay? Start here.
I was under the impression that Brillouin was going to start selling blueprints to different power generating utilities over the oncoming year. If they don't have a prototype, that's not possible, is it?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure where you heard that, but that's not true. There's no plan to sell blueprints or anything of that nature. It's really they've been talking to people about this go-to-market strategy that I mentioned, which is replacing generation assets. That currently is their plan on how they're going to do it, but there's no plan to reduce or put plans out or blueprints, anything of that nature. Okay.
Yes, sir, I'm late to the meeting, you may have covered this, but many amateurs like myself have been told about patents that you can build anybody's patent and use it yourself and it's okay. But you cannot build something of somebody else's patent and sell it to your neighbor. Can you clarify that at all? Are you an expert in that area, I hope?
I think what you're asking is, can you take someone's patent and let's say the patent is sufficient that you could actually build something from it for your own purposes, for your own experimentation, right? As opposed to building it for commercial purposes that you might want to sell the device to other people. My understanding is the first scenario there, where you build it for your own purpose to see if it works, you can do that without violating the patent. But the patent creates a commercial monopoly during the life of the patent. That's what it does. Maybe one more question, Regina. One or two more questions.
I was just wondering about Keshe Foundation.
The Keshe Foundation. I don't really know very much. I'd love to learn more about them. Yeah.
This isn't really more of a question, this is just pointing out something as well. In Germany, they just recently made a solar unit that has 49% efficiency. And they now have, you mentioned that it only works in direct sunlight.
Mm-hmm.
Germany now, they're the world's leading solar technology investors, and they now have a UV situation, so it doesn't require direct sunlight, it just picks up UV.
Mm-hmm.
And they've now rolled out a whole, I think it's like 100-kilometer section of the Autobahn has
Great.
solar along the whole thing now. And it's like the world's largest solar producing thing, and it has something like 50 megawatts or something. It's really efficient.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
So they're doing really well on that side.
Yeah. I mean, as I said, solar is increasing in efficiency, and it's a great technology. I don't actually have anything negative to say. I just don't think it's quite enough. And the more sources we have, the better, really. So I think I'm going to wrap. Maybe one more, Regina. One more question, and we'll wrap up.
I just had a question on the funding aspect. What kind of funding or how much funding are you talking about in order to get this kind of product or something to commercial state?
Well, I mean, I'd love to see, to start, it would be nice to see the a ARPA-E project. ARPA is sort of modeled on the Defense Advanced Research product. It's for advanced energy, and I'd love to see just some early seed capital for there, which they usually do, $5 million early funding. The amounts of funding that are needed here, or the amounts that could be used, is in the multiple millions. The hot energy projects that are being developed now are getting extremely higher amounts of money from the public. For our taxpayers are going into the hot fusion projects that, even by their own estimates, are 25, 30 years away before they have anything useful to use. So very difficult.
I just have a quick question. What happens on the scene politically when you have the DOE and DARPA now seeking this technology?
Mm-hmm.
What happens to people like Andrea Rossi?
Well, I mean, I think what will happen is they'll start funding projects of their own that are doing it. That if Rossi or Brillouin they'll either be working with the Department of Energy, which they may already be, we don't know for sure, or they, hopefully their patent positions will be strong enough to withstand attacks of anyone else. And ideally, also people like the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project that are doing the open source project, that will allow other scientists to learn about what things are going on and get it into the public domain that way through an open source project, which I didn't talk much about, but also could be very, very interesting.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Big round of applause for David.
So I really do just want to finish by going back to what I talked about in the beginning of the talk. My vision of what the world can be like. And I look to all of you to educate me on what's possible, what's next. But I think for humanity, this kind of technology is extremely important. And so, I say, let's make all the decisions, let's have the right resolve so that we really truly can regenerate Earth as the paradise planet we'll be proud to leave our children.
Thank you, David.